From ESPN, it is Mike Tannenbaum on 𝙒𝙀 and 𝙀𝘶. Mike, good morning. Thanks for coming back. How you doing, bud?
Good to be with you guys.
I'd like to start with a question from your GM days because Brian Gutekunst, and again, I haven't done the research on the other 31 teams and other 31 GMs, but it is remarkable what a high percentage of his draft picks or guys he picks up subsequently were guys that came in for top 30 pre-draft visits. And I'm wondering, going back to when you were a GM, how you utilized those. Were those did you ever use them for subterfuge to make other teams think you were interested in someone you weren't? How did you utilize those?
Yeah, look, I think it really speaks to what, Brian and Matt LaFleur have done a great job of, a very systematic process. And I know, like, us in the media make a big deal of, like, subterfuge and throwing people off. I always felt like the draft process was hard enough just to do it authentically that I didn't really play those games. But typically you would bring guys in that you were interested in, that you had another question. It could be, security, medical, question about their ability to learn, off-field issue, whatever it may be. So there's obviously significant interest. But with that said, we would tell players at the combine that, hey, look, if you don't hear from us, that's not necessarily a bad sign. It just means that we don't have any more questions.
Mike, has there been any, when you were going through those processes, what is that big red flag? Because I'm guessing as this has gotten more evolved, agents and their teams have gotten players really dialed into answering the questions properly. Has there been a case where you've sat down, interviewed a guy, and then said, we're not grabbing this guy, we're not going to draft, he's undraftable?
Yeah, we took quarterbacks off the board when we would show them interception plays, and they would blame the play caller or a teammate. Like for quarterbacks, you want, as Coach Parcells would say, battlefield commanders, where when you're successful, you give credit, and when there's blame, it's your fault. So, you look for people that are selfless, team-oriented, that, want to invest in their teammates and accept blame. And you'd be surprised, especially at the quarterback position, when that doesn't happen.
What if nobody went to their birthday party? Oh, wait, that was a fictional movie. Never mind.
Good call.
Mike, when you're talking about quarterbacks, obviously the Packers a few years ago drafted Jordan Love. He sat for 3 years. Now he's going into year 3. I have some questions about him. But first, how do you view this quarterback class? I'm trying to understand just how it doesn't feel like there's the same level of we think this guy's a can't-miss type guy in this group. Do you feel the same way? How do you view the first-round quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think they're a little bit underrated in my opinion. I think Cam Ward has a chance to be really good. Shedeur Sanders, to me, I keep saying I see Kirk Cousins, which is a really good quarterback who played for a long time. I think Tyler Shugg is really interesting out of Louisville, and Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss. Those are my 4 first-round quarterbacks. So I think it's probably a little bit better than others see it as.
Well, speaking of Jordan Love, I'm curious where you see him in his development, because Tausch and I have been talking for a while now about this is such a critical year for him. He had such a great back half of 23. You can say the injuries factored in last year, the drops factored in last year, but he did not make the leap that I think everyone, including Jordan, was expecting. Where do you see him right now, this moment, and what does he have to do to elevate his game in 2025?
Yeah, I'm very bullish on him. I think he has a chance to be a superstar. Look, he has to clean up, a handful of plays a game, which candidly every quarterback does. Mm-hmm. I think that comes with experience or knowing that, hey, we have a really good defense and, checking the ball down here is good. He does have a lot of confidence in his arm. You watch him play, that's pretty apparent. I'm very high on him, very bullish about his future.
Mike, how do you look at this receiving core? Because from the Packers standpoint, and then also this draft class of wideouts, because that is what our fans have been asking and they want. But when you're picking up wideouts, do you try to stagger it where you don't have – there's so much in year 4 and year 3, you have decisions you have to make, and when guys maybe don't make that jump, How do you evaluate where Green Bay's at the wide receiver spot?
Yeah, I've always liked it. When you look at Reed, Dobbs, and Watson, look, they have different skill sets. You throw in the tight ends. Like, I think it's a good group. I know there's no dominant difference-making one, but I like it. You want to throw the ball to the open guy, let your quarterback play point guard. I wouldn't be surprised, like what they typically do, add a second-round receiver, maybe in the third. So, I look, would you love to have a number one difference maker? Of course you would, but I don't think there's many teams that you would say, wow, we take that group of receivers over Green Bay's.
What about the way, and Tausch mentioned this, Mike, but what about the way Goody has kind of stacked roster spots with multiple picks in the same drafts, right? Like, if we look at the Packers' offensive line, Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, and Sean Ryan are all in the last year of their deals. At wide receiver, Watson and Dobbs are in their last year of their deal this year. Next year, Reed and Wicks will be in the last year of their deals. When you're trying to build a roster, does that matter? Because it does feel like you're putting yourself in a position where you got a lot of guys in one spot. You got to figure out what you want to do with them. And when they play a lot, you'd like to think you got enough information. But like Tausch kind of said there, I'm not sure that Goody has sufficient information to know who he really wants to keep and who he's willing to let walk.
Yeah, look, in a cap system, you can't pay them all. I think they've done a pretty good job, though, of identifying core guys and keeping them. Aaron Jones left, obviously. Certainly seems like Jair Alexander is going to be on his way out. But I think over the course of time, they've done a pretty good job of retaining their own. And, look, in a cap system, guys, some of them are going to graduate. That's just part of the math. But I think, well, do I think they're going to add a receiver, an offensive lineman, and a corner at some point? Absolutely. And then, the other thing is because they've had such great, productive drafts, you could go out and get a Xavier McKinney and be opportunistic. And there's a lot of teams like the Dallas Cowboys that just haven't been afforded that luxury.
Mike, you just mentioned Jair. How would you as a GM handle this situation where last year he was playing and he got hurt and was unable to get back out there? There's no roster bonus that kind of spurs this on, and there's no trade, at least it doesn't feel like, that makes it worthwhile for Green Bay to do it. How long do you keep a guy on a roster even though you probably know he's not going to be at fall camp? How do you approach that if you're a GM?
Yeah, ideally, I think you'll see this around the league, guys. Like, this is, the draft, you want to kind of clean things up. So I would think next week would be a good time for that to bring, closure, and hopefully, he gets someplace he wants to be. Green Bay gets, relatively decent value, and you get closure to it.
All right. Before I let you go, Mike, the Pittsburgh Steelers situation with Aaron Rodgers, you had a similar situation with Favre. Now this is obviously a little bit unique in the fact you don't know if he's going to play for you. You have the draft coming. You don't want to go into the season with Mason Rudolph as your quarterback. What are you doing if you're Pittsburgh and you're in this situation?
Yeah, we just talked about for 2 hours on Get Up. You got to go get a guy. I think Aaron Rodgers is telling you a lot by not signing him by now. So I wouldn't be surprised if, they were a little bit aggressive in the draft and go get Shedeur Sanders if he's there, or, Jackson Dart. I'm just hard-pressed to think that they're going to pay $30 million a year to give up a second-round pick for DK Metcalf and have Mason Rudolph be their open day quarterback.
All right, Mike, along those lines before you go, Tausch's dad used to always say, talent outs. So is Aaron Rodgers still at a place as a player? You watched him last year when he was back from the Achilles. Is he still at a place where talent outs and you're willing as a GM to tolerate the uncertainty or the waiting or him hoping that J.J. McCarthy falls flat on his face and he can go to Minnesota instead? Like, is he good enough that the Steelers should wait for him or not?
We're getting close to that point where I don't think so. 42 years old, He played well, not great. If his last name was Smith or Jones, we probably would have said, hey, let's move on. You give the benefit of the doubt to, obviously, an all-time great player, but he's close to the end.
Yeah. Well, if his name was 𝙒𝙬𝙀, we definitely would have moved on. Mike, we appreciate your time. You're the best, man.
All right, thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.